I made the worst mistake possible, and I trusted my brother. My good-for-nothing brother, and this is how he repays me. I'm currently en route to meet with some clients after spending the night with my father at the hospital where he was rushed to yesterday after suffering a cardiac arrest. I was called upon by my mother yesterday when my father slumped, and though I responded in time to save my father's life, it's sad that my mother never bothered calling my older brother, who was 9 years ahead of me. My parents have given birth to us, just the two of us, my brother and I, and my dad had quit working some years back when he was diagnosed with a heart condition that has since given him near-death experiences. My mother tried her best to cater for the family through a primary school teacher. In my area, it could not earn much to keep a family afloat of 4. I praised my mother because despite the fact that she equally had to mindful of her health, she would sometimes throw caution to the wind and take on several jobs at once just so that she could meet up with the financial demands in the family. It is pitiable because she had a grown-up son who was 30 years old, refused growing up mentally. My brother Nathan was the male child, but he never lived up to either the male or female responsibility at home. He was a graduate who worked at a factory where he was well paid, and that is thanks to my mom. But he never attempted to share any form of financial responsibility whatsoever. He just did not contribute to the family, and each time my parents or anyone tried to advise him to, quote, man up and face responsibilities, which were staring at him right in the face, he would pick offense and start causing a lot of trouble. He'd oftentimes threaten to leave the house for good, and even though I secretly wished that he carried out those threats, he just never did. He obviously knew that he would not survive 2 seconds out there on his own. I, on the other hand, recently graduated from college where I studied linguistics. But right after my graduation, I delved into entrepreneurship, where I made handcrafted beads and sold to the little clientele that I was building. People loved my handiwork, and it was from there that I supported and took care of my parents. As I earlier noted, this was not the first time that my father would be rushed to the hospital, but this time around, the bill was too much for my mother and I to handle, so we'd reached out to my brother to help. His answer was unsurprising. He said no because he claimed to be broke. Well, when it came to someone like my brother who was so stingy, you could never really tell when he was broke or not, and it made no difference. He's always unwilling to help. I just hope the clients that I meet with today would be generous enough to pay instantly, and even drop a tip, and they usually did. What's up, everybody? Mr. Redito here. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. So this story is kind of a sad one. Starting out, well, we have a lot of issues going on in the family. I just want you to know this story has 5 updates. Let's go ahead and jump into update number 1, which occurred 2 weeks after the original post. Hey guys, I have the most shocking news to tell you. My older brother is currently married. He got married a few days ago, and now I'm not angry at the fact that he's married, no. A 30-year-old man is sure due for marriage. But my anger is at the fact that he got married just 2 weeks after our father was discharged from the hospital. 2 weeks after he had claimed to be broke. This should go a long way to buttress my point that my older brother Nathan is an insensitive, selfish individual. There was no way he would have gotten married 2 weeks later with prior preparations. Getting married right after his father was discharged from the hospital meant that he had money all along, but he preferred using it to organize a wedding ceremony rather than help save his father's life. In a matter of life and death that involved his father, he chose himself. How selfish. I could remember when he came to inform us that he was getting married. He came with a lady who was called Isabel to inform us about the wedding date that had already been fixed. I could see the look of disappointment on the face of my parents. A look of disappointment which was equally on my face. How could someone that old behave like such a little child? He never informed us of the desire to marry. He obviously did not value the counsel of anyone. I just sat there pitying the lady who he wanted to get married to, if only she knew the level of bondage she was about to get into. A relationship where she would have to play the role of both wife and husband. That was practically getting married to a grown baby that she didn't even know. My father was wise enough to not start downgrading his son in the presence of the lady that he wanted to marry, so he just remained diplomatic. All he said was that marriage was a serious commitment that should be entered into after both parties had carefully thought of the implications of getting married. It was after my brother's fiancée had left that my father called him to really give him a piece of his mind. My father started by telling my brother how disappointed he was, and my father was speaking the mind of my mother and I. He told my son that he had failed the family, and that was exactly the truth. He had not honored us by telling us before then that he had the intention of getting married, and my father equally emphasized the fact that my brother refusing to help out with the hospital bill simply proved that he did not value his life in any way. My brother kept quiet all along, and he apparently really didn't care. He finally reacted when my father touched his nerve by saying he was in no way ready for marriage. They say the truth hurts, and oh boy, it hurt Nathan that day. He lost his temper and walked out on us. The next time we would see him was on his wedding day. My mother had pled with my father to overlook her son's childness and attend the wedding, otherwise father's mind was made up to sit back and probably stay out of Nathan's life forever. Left for me, I think that it's the best idea because with my father's fragile heart, he would not need to stay around someone who complicated things for him. Do you not agree? The wedding was a flashy one. Everyone who attended to tell that it must have cost an extravagant amount of money to set up. But the surprising thing was that Nathan was the only one covering the cost, as the girl's parents are not financially buoyant. The wedding gave Nathan off as someone who was from a wealthy background, and that was what he wanted, a massage to his ego and pride. Oh boy, this one's heating up. Mr. Redito here, so update 2 is around the corner. Just so you know, it's 7 months after the wedding. So let's jump into that update. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click that big ol' red subscribe button. Let's go into update 2. It's been 7 months since my brother got married, and he's not called to check up on us since he left. Well, it's been both ways, as we too have purposefully minded our business, though we kept our ears on the ground for news which we were sure would come soon. So far, they've been rumors flying about him abusing his wife, and while I can't attest to that, I wouldn't deny it, as the brother who I know is impatient, immature, and temperamental. My parents and I were at home on a Sunday morning when we received a call from my older brother. His voice was shaky, and it made my mother very anxious. As for my father and I, we could care less. My brother said that his pregnant wife was in the hospital battling for her health. We were surprised to hear that his wife was pregnant, and he never told us. But when you look at my brother's history, someone who we've never told that he was getting married, you would know that it was typical of him. He pleaded with us to please rush down to the hospital to see what was wrong. I knew that my brother was not calling for emotional support. It was going to boil down to rendering him some sort of assistance, either staying at the hospital to look after his wife or either helping him out financially. All the same, I decided to go see what was wrong, but it turned out to be he wanted a form of assistance. I made up my mind to decline, and his father had been in the hospital several times over the years, and he never assisted us in any way, emotional, financial, or physical. The only thing he ever contributed freely to the family was problems and heartaches. I got to the hospital and found that things were actually very serious. It's not more serious than my brother had sounded. He said that his wife Isabella had complications that led to the death of their child, and she needed to urgently be evacuated of the dead remains of the child, otherwise risked endangering herself. But the doctors insisted that my brother made a deposit of half of the amount, otherwise they would not start. My brother needed money, and he begged like his whole world depended on it. That was him. When he needs assistance, he would never take no for an answer, but if he were someone else, he would claim to be broke and walk out without a care in the world. He promised he would pay me back within 3 months' time, and I didn't know what to do. The money which I had on me was what I was using to run my business. I would have walked out on him as he usually did to other people, but I took a look at his wife, and I immediately changed my mind. His wife Isabella was looking pale, and there was little life left in her. Her body had marks all over, and I knew that the rumors of my brother's physicality abusing her was definitely true. I gave my older brother Nathan one of the 2 credit cards which I owned, as he had already reached the limit. He quickly made the payment, and the doctors began the operation. After the whole saga played out, I knew his wife needed to recover her strength, and this meant some more financial expenses would need to be made. So, what'd I do? I gave him my credit card and asked him to not go beyond a certain limit, please. This was an act of charity on my part, and I told him not to repay me, except for the hospital cost. I know that my brother certainly did not deserve that act of kindness which I've shown to him, because if I were the one in the position, he would not think twice before turning his back on me. But I guess they say I'm not so wicked to abandon his wife who had done nothing to me wrong. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Strap your seatbelts in, grab your favorite snack, your favorite beverage, and sit back and relax, because Update 3 is going to blow your socks off. Guys, it's been 3 weeks since the previous post, and this is what goes down. It's 3 weeks since I came to my brother's rescue, and I'm currently looking for a pawn shop to sell most of his property. And this is because he's left me stranded with no other option. My father began complaining about his heart having unusual palpitations a few days ago, so I had to take him in for a medical checkup. This would obviously require money, right? One which is in short supply. I have bills to settle. I need to raise a little money to add what I could and buy some raw materials for my business. I was at a place where I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. My mother was yet to receive her monthly salary, which we would likely spend on feeding for the next month. And I could not call my brother for assistance because he did not have it. As a matter of fact, he was with my credit card, which I've given him a few weeks back when his new wife was ill, a card which he'd failed to return since. While I was busy thinking of how to go about the whole thing, I got a message that the credit card which I gave to my older brother had been maxed out. This was both shocking and heartbreaking. I'd clearly told him what my limit is and to not exceed it. My plan was to rally around and add to what he could and left and use for the business. My brother was yet to repay me for the hospital bill, and even though I'd freely given him my credit card to be used to take care of his wife, he exceeded the limits that I put on it. My good deed had turned back to haunt me. If at this point you say that my brother does not deserve any good thing in his life, I will most definitely agree with you. I quickly picked up my phone and dialed his phone number, but he wasn't picking up. It was a Monday morning, and so I guessed he was likely going to be at the factory where he worked, and that was probably the reason why he wasn't picking up my phone calls. I left the house and took a cab down to his place of work. I inquired about my elder brother at the factory where he worked, as I could not find him. But the reply his friends there gave me made me look stupid, as family members should of his place of work. They said that he no longer worked there. He'd willingly resigned recently based on the reason that he's gotten, quote, the opportunity of a lifetime. I left the factory and made my way to his house. He was bound to be at his house, and if he wasn't, his wife would certainly know his whereabouts. I got to my brother's home to find his wife Isabel, crying her eyes out. Gosh, she looked miserable. I did my best to comfort her before going ahead to ask about her husband. She told me that her husband had left home 3 days after she returned from the hospital. She laminated that it was his usual lifestyle to go missing for days, only to resurface in a drunken state. She attested to the fact that her husband regularly abused her, physically, each time, and she tried to talk to him about the way that he lived his life, and I was shocked when she alluded to the miscarriage, which she suffered that nearly took her life to be as a result of being beaten by my brother. My brother is worse than an animal. Neither my brother nor I had ever seen my father raise his hands on our mother, so I wonder who my brother took after in character. I personally would never condone any form of domestic violence. If I were Isabella, I'd probably have reacted by doing something nasty. If only she was able to read my thoughts the day my brother came to introduce her to us, she would perhaps have escaped the whole mess before it started. Isabel initially had no idea where her husband was until I informed the factory workers what they told me. He resigned because he, quote, had the opportunity of a lifetime. It was then that she noted that he was probably at a friend's place trying to make his Bitcoin dream come true. Bitcoin's a digital currency that's gradually being accepted for online transactions, but most countries like ours don't really support it. There are stories of folks who slept as paupers, but woke up as billionaires, all thanks to that little Bitcoin, as they claimed, and these stories were probably things that were motivating my brother. My brother had apparently used my credit card to get involved in the whole Bitcoin trash. Now, I wouldn't have any issues with that if it was his money, but I seriously got mad because he used the money from my business to chase his dream, which to me was an illusion. While I was busy thinking about the next line of action to take, his wife immediately began packing her things. She was going to leave house. I tried dissuading her, but she noted that she had enough of my brother in a marriage that was less than 1 year old. She said that if she stayed back, there was no guarantee that she would live to tell the tale, as the beatings, which she had been receiving from my brother, were beginning to take a toll on her. And she could not stay back even if she wanted to because their rent was up, and my brother was not going to pay the bill. She was the one who had paid the last rent from little savings, which she made before getting married to my brother. And so rather than wait to be thrown out, it was in her best interest to leave with her honor intact. I let her go as I perfectly understood her. Though I'd stayed with my brother while growing up, I would not live with a husband like him for 3 months, even if I was offered the whole wide world. He could kill me before 3 days was even up. I watched as Isabel left me alone in the house while heading to her parents' place. I suddenly got an idea out of desperation. I was going to sell off my brother's properties. Every dang thing that anyone was willing to buy. I began putting them together. I was quite surprised when I found a limited card pack, which I knew was worth a lot of money. But that wasn't all. I discovered gaming equipment, which he had built on his own years back. I included the gaming equipment, not necessary because of its worth in the market, but because of its sentimental value to my brother. This was not just a move to recover my money, it was a move to teach him to never mess with me or my dream again. I took the things home but hid them from my parents while I began searching for someone who owned a pawn shop. It took me just a day to find such an individual who evaluated the worth of everything. It turned out to be twice the amount which my older brother had robbed me of. I didn't sell it yet, though. I spent the next 3 days trying to reach him via his mobile number. But even though the call went through, he refused to pick up. He obviously knew I've discovered what he did with my credit card and felt that I was calling to raise a dust. But what he never knew was the fact that I was calling to give him a chance to redeem himself before I executed my irreversible plan. It was equally clear that he had not returned home since his wife left. Otherwise, he would have discovered his wife was gone, and his properties which held dear were equally missing. After avoiding me for 3 days, I finally sold his stuff, used the money to take my father to the hospital for his checkup, and the rest was used in my financing of my dream. My handiwork. I guess you could say we're even now. Update number 4, 1 week later. I recently moved out of my parents' home to a different location in the city just to avoid my brother. My brother returned to his house that very day that I sold his stuff. He discovered his missing wife and property. He was angry as expected, but not at the fact that his wife had left the house. No, that didn't bother him as he was obviously fed up with the lady. And that was exactly what my father was saying when he told my brother that he was not yet mature for marriage, though he was of marriageable age. He has gotten tired of marriage that's barely a year old, and my brother was angry at the fact that his wife left him with properties. Or so he thought. He wasted no time in going down to his parents' place like the angry wolf that he is. He got there and began shouting the name of his wife at the top of his voice and pounced on her the moment he set eyes on her. He gave her a really good beating, and his in-laws, who were just old feeble couple, could only call the neighbors for help as they watched him banter the life out of her. The neighbors finally gathered together and separated Isabella from the elder brother's grasp. He immediately asked her to go and get all of his property, which she left from his house with, but she insisted to everyone there that she had no idea what he was even talking about. Her parents, who were around their daughter when she came back from her husband's house, equally attested to her story, saying that she had just come back with her own stuff. While my brother was busy going back and forth with his in-laws, I quickly sent him pictures of the amount I've generated from the sale of his stuff, while equally warning him to never mess with my dream again. It dawned on my brother that he had just messed up himself in public. Virtually now everyone was against him, and the crowd almost leeched him as they've witnessed him beat up his wife for something which she never even did. Before he could appeal for mercy, his in-laws called the police, who took him away and locked him up. My brother called my parents from jail where he was being detained, and my mother visited him. He narrated the whole incident to her, but left out the part where he used my credit card to the point where it maxed out. My mother came home and almost chewed my head off for putting my brother into this mess. That's when I informed her and my father about what he's done to me. How he put my dream in jeopardy, just because of which was likely going to turn out to be a scam. My father was very much in support of what I did. Left for him, he wanted my brother to rot in prison. But my mother went to plead with the in-laws to secure my brother's release. Our in-laws are still considering the appeal. I currently moved out of the house because of my in-laws deciding to release my brother, as I feel they would. I wouldn't want to be around him for a while if I wanted to stay alive. What's up, everybody? Mr. Retaliation here. So there's one final update in this entire saga series. It's exactly the 20th day since the last update, and the brother's life has currently taken several different turns. Our in-laws were really reluctant in letting my brother off the hook, but my mother remained persistent. They finally gave in, but they had certain demands which my brother was to meet and my mother was to act as his surety. This would really be a bad idea because my brother was unreliable. I don't want to believe that it's a mother's love that's driving her to be so naive, because if in the future I had a son who behaved like my elder in the slightest way, I'd most certainly be the one to hand him over to the police myself and watch him rot in jail. Our in-laws demanded that my brother would reimburse every single amount which they spent in treating their daughter that had been mutilated. He was equally going to sign the divorce papers which they'd already prepared, and the paper contained a clause that said my elder brother was going to settle their daughter with a sum of $5,000, and he was to do it within 6 months after the divorce papers had been signed, and the divorce made official. In a sense, I consider Isabel's miscarriage as a good thing, because if she did give birth to that child of my brother, then he'd always have a reason to be present in her life because of the child. My mother and her son willingly agreed to the demands, even though we all know that my brother could not even boast a dime. Neither was he hardworking enough to raise that amount on his own, even if given the rest of his life to try it. I warned my mother against standing on his surety, because even her salary would not be enough to cater to the bill. What I'm avoiding is a situation whereby my mother would expect me to pay using my hard-earned money, just to keep my good-for-nothing brother out of jail. It would never happen. My brother finally got out of jail. He'd spent just 7 days there, much to my disappointment. I'd wish that Isabel would press charges and sue him for court of battery, infidelity, wrongful accusations, you name it, and every other crime which he's committed that way. He would have spent a longer part of his life behind bars. My mother was the one who picked him up from jail, and, well, of course, she took him straight to his house to help him get settled in, as my father did not want to set eyes on him ever again. Upon getting to his house, they discovered that his things had been thrown out by the landlord as his rent was past overdue. He called his friend who was leading him on the Bitcoin dream, but his friend informed him that the whole thing was a scam. My brother was stranded in every sense of the word. He had no money, no house, no wife, nothing. Nothing at all. My mother, seeing her son had nowhere else to turn, had no other option than to bring him back to the house. She spent over 2 hours pleading with my father to let him in, and my father finally did after stating his conditions. My demands that my older brother got a job within 1 week of moving in with him, and 50% of his earnings would be used as his own contribution for the family's upkeep. He would equally help around with the chores at the house. And lastly, he was not to harass me in any form of manner, It was after my brother agreed to my father's terms and conditions that he finally let him move in with him. My mother got my brother a job at a supermarket within 3 days of moving into the house. She knew that my father was not as young as he used to be. He would have no difficulty keeping to his threat by throwing my brother out of the house if he failed to secure a job within the given time frame. My father called me to ask me to return to the house as my brother was no longer a threat. Well, I declined. Not really for the fear of my brother, though I don't think it would be wise living with him as you can never tell when he's going to snap. But I declined my father's request to come back to the house because I'd already gotten myself really entangled to my fiancé by the name of Eric. Eric was the brother of one of the clients who patronized me frequently. He'd gotten used to seeing me come deliver my products to his sister, and it was not long before we began talking. Eric and I officially began dating last month after I've moved out of my parents' house, and I said yes last week to his proposal to get married. After I said yes to Eric, I knew it was time for Eric to meet my parents. I was not going to dishonor them just as my brother had done when fixed a wedding without their knowledge. The day Eric and I went home was really epic. Eric had a Mercedes G-Wagon, and we made quite the entrance. Even though I'd informed my parents prior to the time that I was coming to introduce them to the guy who had sought after my hand in marriage, they were surprised to see I had quite a catch of a man. The beautiful part was the fact that my older brother Nathan was around. My dad had demanded he'd stayed back as his junior sister was coming to introduce her fiancé to the family, something he failed to do properly. The look of shame on my brother's face was more satisfying than the dish, which my mother had taken hours to prepare for our meal. My father did not go easy on my brother. He used every opportunity which he got to reiterate to my brother to emulate his junior sister. Even though I enjoyed the whole thing, I thought my father was going a bit too far with the whole thing, but I was in it for yet another surprise. My father began talking about how he can confidently beat his chest of the fact that I was more mature and ready for marriage than my marriage was. My parents were very pleased with Eric. They gave us their blessings to go ahead and get married. Eric and I are currently planning our wedding. In less than a month's time, I would become a married woman. One thing's for sure, my marriage would be way, way more successful than that of my brother. Alright guys, this was an absolutely roller coaster ride of a story. Nathan was an absolute disaster. Let me know if you've ever had a similar experience to that of this story. If you have, maybe not your brother, maybe not your direct sibling, maybe even your friend's sibling that you heard a story about. Let me know your thoughts. My favorite comments to read are similar situation stories, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about these saga stories. I've been trying really hard to find all these guys, so go ahead and do me the biggest favor if you do want to support me. All you have to do is click that subscribe button. Once again, thank you for joining in, guys. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you tomorrow.